Are you ready for Kansas to play in the Big 12 championship game? Because I am, and that's how I think this is playing out. That's Derek Johnson, Locked On Jayhawks, joining me here on the show. A 10-win regular season Kansas football team. Derek, that would have been a foreign phrase that was unrecognizable to everybody at the University of Kansas just 5 or 10 years ago or so, but that's what I'm about to lay out here. And why don't we just start with what your record prediction is off the top? If you've got one, if you're not there yet, that's okay. But I am there, and I am bullish on Kansas in the Big 12, and I think they're going to make the Big 12 championship game.
Yeah, so I'm sitting at 9-3 right now. My biggest hesitation is the Jalon Daniels health. So that's why I'm hedging it. If you guaranteed me Jalon will be healthy for, even 11 of the 12 games, I would take him to win double digits as well.
Yeah, and that is certainly a caveat. If anybody's starting quarterback, if Avery Johnson goes down, it's not the same team over there in Manhattan. It's just that we've
seen it enough with Jalon that it feels more real, right?
Oh, yeah, I think that's valid. But if Shedeur Sanders goes down for Colorado, that probably isn't a bowl team who we were talking about earlier on today's show. But their non-conference slate is not impossible, but like sneaky. You better not overlook these guys. They go at Illinois week 2. They open with Lindenwood, who's been a Division I team for, I think, about an hour and a half at this point. So that should be fine. At Illinois, then they host UNLV. UNLV is one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the Mountain West going into this year. I like Kansas to win all 3 of those games, Derek, but they best not overlook either the Illini in Champaign or UNLV at home that has probably a mid-tier Power 5 roster or high-end Mountain West roster, however you want to see it. Like, that's a solid football team.
Yeah, and I don't know if it helps or hurts them that they just played them in a bowl game. Because on one hand, you would say, well, if Kansas is the more talented team, having more familiarity should be good for that, because then it's less about what's schemed up. It's more about just the Jimmies and the Joes. But UNLV is a very talented team, and I think that one will be very interesting in terms of, what is it going to look like without Jaden Maeva for UNLV? Like at the quarterback position, how's that going to affect them? The Illinois one is interesting because you go back and look at the final score last year when Kansas beat Illinois, and that was on a Friday night in Lawrence when they debuted the black uniforms and did the blackout and everything. And there's 34-23. Loved them. Great. But 34-23, you're sitting up at the end of the day and going, was that good of a win? They went 5-7 a year ago. You go back and you watch the game. Kansas was in control of that game in the first half. They were in control of that game through 3 quarters. And what happened in the second half, Kobe Bryant, who was a first-team All-Big 12 corner, Austin Booker, first-team All-Big 12 defensive end, both get ejected for targeting. So that ends up allowing them to come back. They just had a couple blown plays, a couple weird things happen against them, and they kind of let their foot off the gas. Like, that was one of those games where it felt like they should have won by a lot more. So that becomes interesting because how much is the home road split worth? How much better is, the offensive line going to be this year for Illinois because it wasn't as good last year? You lose Jerzon Newton, who I thought was the best player for Illinois in that game. But yeah, it's tricky anytime you go on the road that early in the season. Again, Illinois has a lot of new transfers, so I think it's better to play them that early in the season than later. But it's definitely one anytime you go on the road against a Power 5 team, can't really overlook.
I don't think Kansas is going to get off to a sparkling start in conference play because they have to begin with, oh dear, it's West Virginia on the road in Morgantown. I think they're going to start Big 12 play with a loss. And then, Derek, I think Kansas is going to become as hot as a July Sunday in Lawrence. I think it is going to be a scorching hot stretch. I think Jalon Daniels is going to sharpen himself into focus and have that Tim Tebow leadership mentality of, you know what? We're going to play harder than everybody else. We're not losing this game. If you keep him healthy, Kansas is making the Big 12 championship game. And after they lose to West Virginia, I think they beat TCU at home. Now that's at Arrowhead, so home is relative here. That's going to be relevant later. At Arizona State, I think they're better than ASU, who we're going to get to later in today's show. Houston, I think, is the worst team in the Big 12. I think they'll beat them no problem. And then I think they will go to Manhattan. The difference in this game, very similar teams, Kansas and Kansas State. They both have Big 12 title aspirations. They both have multi-year, proven to be successful head coaches. The difference here, and why I like Kansas, I've got Jalon Daniels over here and Avery Johnson over there. And Avery Johnson's a lot of potential. But if Jalon Daniels is healthy, you give me the better quarterback and 2 teams that are on fairly even footing, Yeah, I'm taking Kansas to win that football game. And then, and I'll let you jump in here in a sec, the emotional letdown post rivalry win, they lose to Iowa State at Arrowhead Stadium the following week. What do you think of those picks?
I think they're all very plausible. The West Virginia game feels very much like a coin flip early in the season. And I think if you win that one, like the momentum that could build would be huge, as it did a couple years ago when they got bowl eligible for the first time and forever. And that was their first road game of the season. That was their first Big 12 game of the season too, just like this one. Now I think this West Virginia team is obviously better than that one. Yeah, I mean, the Houston game actually, even though they could be the worst team in the Big 12, Willie Fritz really wanted this job when it came open, when Lance Leipold took it. It was Lance Leipold, Jeff Monken. Those were the two finalists, and Willie Fritz really wanted the job. He has Kansas City ties. He's done well as an underdog. So that game, even though I'm picking Kansas to win it, I could see that one end up being sneaky close, especially as you're looking ahead to the Kansas State game. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, the Kansas State game, this is where I'm at. So it feels like things have been building for a while for Kansas finally to beat Kansas State. And I don't know, this might upset some local fans, but like, I'm one of those people who I'm going to bet with a streak. Kansas State has won 14 straight games in this series. So I believe Kansas can beat them. But until they show they can do it, until that streak actually does change, I'm not going to go away from it, I guess.
Okay. All right. That's valid. But you know what? No streak lasts forever. Mm-hmm. And this is probably the best chance to go into Manhattan and win that Kansas has had since that 14-game win streak first got underway many moons ago. But are you with me on the Iowa State game? That feels like a stumble spot. You were telling me before we recorded you like what Iowa State, what their fan base is going to bring to Arrowhead Stadium.
Yeah, so because it's Arrowhead, there's more tickets for sale. They travel so well. I don't know. That could end up being like a bowl game where it's kind of a split of a crowd, and they have a really good team. We had Phil Steele on with us on our show a couple weeks ago, and he was really high on Iowa State. That's been a close game for Kansas the last 2 years. They won both games, but both were kind of coin flip games. And yeah, I mean, that would not be surprising for them to end up losing that one. I think that one, in the same vein of the West Virginia game, are both kind of those coin flips that could go either way.
The last 3 games of the season, you've got 2 on the road against a couple of pretty manageable opponents. You know, Baylor could be a bowl team, maybe. That's the regular season finale. At BYU, tough place to go. Beautiful place to play a football game, by the way, at Lavelle Edwards Stadium in Provo. I've been there before in the booth. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous place to play a football game. Colorado sandwiched in between them. I think Kansas is the better team in all 3 of those games. And whether they go 3-0 down the stretch and fulfill what I'm speaking into fruition here, which is going 10-2 and making the Big 12 championship game, I think that comes down to their ability to just play to their level. Don't play down to your competition. Play the way Kansas is capable. And as you've mentioned, the health of Jalon Daniels will continue to be the biggest question mark, because all of this goes out the window. If you don't have Jalon Daniels, I don't think you're beating Colorado. If you don't have Jalon Daniels, you might not lose, or you might not beat both BYU and Baylor. You could lose one of those games. Certainly you're going to lose at Kansas State. I think those are the factors that come into play down the stretch here for Kansas.
And you're not familiar with being that team. Like if you're beating Kansas State and you're winning all these games, you get to those final 3, you might be ranked in, I don't know, the top 15, something like that, top 10 in the country at one point later in the year. How do you handle the expectations? That's something, you know, they've had good success here. They've had decent success over these past few years. They've been ranked, but like that's a whole nother level of it. And we saw last year Kansas go on the road in altitude against a bad Nevada team, and they barely won that game. So going on the road late at night, time change, in altitude at BYU, that becomes a bit of a trap game, especially against a team who will typically kind of smash you in the mouth with the way that they play hard-nosed football. And then that last game with Baylor is weird because I feel like one of the Texas schools, like Baylor, TCU, somebody, I don't know, maybe UCF, like somebody's going to break out who's sitting on one of these like recruiting-rich pipelines in the Big 12. And the Baylor one is weird because there's nothing that the players in 2010 had to do with this team. But you go back, Kansas has not beaten Baylor since 2007. And only 3 of the games in that span were decided by even less than 20 points. So, like, for whatever reason, Baylor has had Kansas number. Now,
that was then. That was then, right. Derek. This is now.
We did in 2022 see them go down to Waco. It was 35-23. It was 28-23 with like 4 minutes left or something. So maybe this is the one that finally breaks that streak. But yeah, there's just been bad voodoo against the Bears for whatever reason.
Derek Johnson, Locked On Jayhawks, has Kansas at 9-3. I have them 10-2 and playing for a Big 12 championship game where I do think they will lose to Utah. But what a season that could be in Lawrence. Derek, appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Helps only play 3 of the top 9 in the Big 12 preseason poll after playing 6 of the top 7 last year in the final.
When you wonder why I made this pick, that would be one of the reasons why the schedule breaks well enough for the Jayhawks. Just keep Jalon Daniels healthy.